Hi AP Psych class, welcome to Unit 11. We're almost to the end. Unit 11 is over testing and individual differences, and in this first video we're going to discuss what intelligence even is and the various theories that exist to explain intelligence. And so if we take a look here at this question, what is intelligence? Let's start with a definition. Intelligence is kind of broadly defined as the ability to think rationally, learn from experience, and deal effectively with the environment. Now, various theorists are going to have ideas concerning where this comes from. Is it more nature or nurture? We'll get into all of those things later. And there are going to be some discrepancies in how it's even defined from theorist to theorist. But again, that's a good general definition of what most psychologists would agree intelligence is. We measure intelligence using an intelligence test. That's the method, for assessing one's mental aptitudes, and we compare it with those of others using numerical scores. And so that will be discussed in our second video. We'll talk about how we actually do that, and we'll revisit our Unit 2 section on statistics when we talk about things like standardizing tests and validity, reliability, and all of that good stuff. So that's some good review, right? You've probably heard the term IQ, which actually used to stand for intelligence quotient. We'll still use the term IQ, but it's no longer an acronym. IQ is just kind of the word per se that psychologists now use to describe someone's intelligence test score, and so we'll get into that as well. All right, concerning your various theories of intelligence, here are some of the big ones. Spearman had what was known as the two-factor theory, and that he said in order to be considered intelligent, an individual needs to possess two factors, a G factor and an S factor. A G factor would just stand for general intelligence, which he would say would include things like perceptual speed, so how, think of that fluid intelligence, how quickly you could reason through things, but that you could also then possess an S factor, which is your specific intelligence. And so to be intelligent, according to Spearman's theory, everybody had to have the G factor characteristics, like word fluency and perceptual speed. But then the S factor could be in some, I guess, specific talent, such as, math or spatial abilities and things of that nature. Thurstone is what came up with the primary mental abilities, and he is going to say that you have to have all of his primary mental abilities to be considered intelligence. Word fluency was one of his, verbal meaning, spatial reasoning, perceptual speed, numerical reasoning, inductive reasoning, and memory. Sometimes in different readings, visual spatial is what they'll label Thurstone's spatial reasoning as, and also know that sometimes in readings, deductive reasoning is also included in his primary mental abilities. But as you can see there, those were, in Thurstone's theory, the requirements. In order to be intelligent, you had to possess high abilities in all of those areas. Okay, on the flip side, Howard Gardner is going to have his multiple intelligence theory. My guess is that you've been in school long enough that you've probably been exposed to Gardner from some teacher at some point in your educational career. You may just not have known that it was an intelligence theorist, but Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence labels these different characteristics, and Gardner did not believe that you had to possess all of his to be intelligent. You could have one or more. And so Gardner had identified a linguistic intelligence, logical mathematical, musical, spatial, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalist, And the new one that he has been doing some writings on recently is existentialist, which would just be somebody who's has high ability in like pondering large questions about life, like existence, life, death, things of that nature. And so he would say that you only had to have one of those to be considered intelligent, that we all had our specific talents in one or more areas. The reason I said that you might have known this one already is because, honestly, a lot of teachers like to assess their students concerning Gardner's multiple intelligence and then provide projects or lessons that allow students to, select an option for learning that best fits their type of intelligence. It's something related to differentiated instruction for student success. All right, Robert Sternberg has a triarchic model of intelligence. He would say that analytical, creative, and practical, that those are the three levels that you need to have in order to be considered intelligence. Now, he would say that that's going to predict real-world success. And so Sternberg will argue that his theory of intelligence is less theoretical and more practical in its application to like people and how well they do in the world. What Sternberg did, however, believe that this was not stagnant, that all three of his areas in the triarchic model are modifiable. And so you'll actually be reading an article about Sternberg's project concerning that. And then finally, Thorndike, Goleman, Mayer, Salovey, and Caruso kind of are all working on this, right? Obviously, some of them independent of each other, but basically all of them in some way, shape, or form promote I apologize, there are toddlers and dogs in the background of this video, but anyways, emotional intelligence would be that sorry, I'm getting distracted. That you have to have things like impulse control and mood management in order to be successful. And so, you could be, a genius per se concerning any of the other theorists' explanations of what intelligence is, but if you didn't have impulse control, right, you would never be successful in life. If you couldn't keep your mood in check, right, you fly off the handle easily and punch bosses in the face, you'd never be successful in life, because emotional intelligence is like the ability to like interact with others, and I guess that some of that's related to Gardner's, interpersonal skills, but again, that would be something important to possess. Okay, so is intelligence something that's neurologically measurable? Like, can we see an intelligent brain versus a non-intelligent brain? Well, there is some evidence concerning brain size and complexity that's somewhat compelling. But know that overall, there's a relatively small correlation between the size of your brain and intelligence. Okay, so it tends to be that certain regions seem to be larger in comparison. So, for example, Einstein's parietal lobe was 15% larger than the average brain. Hey, that makes sense, right? That's the math part. The key, though, is not necessarily that the brains are bigger, but that highly educated people seem to die with more synapses. Okay, but we're still trying to answer the question, like, what comes first, the synapses or the thirst for knowledge? So is it because they have more synapses that they seek out information, or they're just curious, and about learning, and that's what creates the synapses? And so when we talk about gray areas versus white areas in the brain, gray would be the actual neurons, the neural cell bodies. The white areas are the axons and the dendrites, so the things making the connections. And there is a correlation between higher intelligence and having more gray areas, especially in the areas in charge of memory, attention, and language. And so, is there a correlation between big brains equaling bigger intelligence? Not really. But the complexity of that brain, right? More neurons, more synapses, those sorts of things seem to be relatively correlated to a person's intelligence. Okay, brain function. Um, the area of the frontal lobe that's in charge of like organizing information seems to work better in some than in others, and so that could be a connection to intelligence. And that kind of brings us to like perceptual speed, like how quickly a thought is processed. They've done tests where they would flash an image which was quickly hidden, and then a question would be asked about it. And obviously, there was a correlation between a person's like IQ score and how quickly they can answer questions. Also, we can think about neurological speed. There also seems to be a correlation between how fast a simple task can be performed, like pushing a button every time a person sees an X flash on the screen, and intelligence. And so, it's not necessarily the size of the brain, but the complexity of the brain and the brain's functioning. And what's kind of cool is that neuroscience has showed us some of this more physical evidence of, intelligence and things like perceptual speed. Those are things that were being argued by, our earlier intelligence theorists. Like Spearman and Thurstone. So it's kind of cool. They were probably onto something when they said that was an element of intelligence. Now, is there a genetic connection between perceptual speed and neurological speed? Perhaps. So that could be where that is coming from. Okay, so there's your introduction to intelligence. In the next video, we'll discuss how we assess intelligence. So we'll talk about testing and the importance of valid and reliable standardized tests. So as always, thanks for listening, and bring any questions you have to class.